meeting. Oh, thanks, Sasha. That we're meeting on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. I think we're all within Australia. I'm not sure where you're calling in from, Ashton. We have put it out more broadly. So Ninamani, I'm calling in from the land of the Kaurna people on the Adelaide Plains, and Ninamani means kind of hello, how are you? And if you're good, you say Mani ai in response. So Ninamani.
Mani ai.
Yeah, and I want to, pay my respects, and on behalf of all of us, our respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge their special relationship and connection to country, and that they have been custodians for millennia for the land, air, waters that we all, work and live on, and also that sovereignty was never ceded. So, well, welcome everyone. It's great to have you on this, like our last actual webinar for the year, which is around using results chains to identify risk and negative side effects. So it'd be just great to have everybody like jump in and introduce themselves, maybe on the Miro board first. So I think, Sasha, will you be able to pop that in? And then on the first board, if you just grab a sticky note, which is on the left-hand side, and just answer the kind of questions on the first board there.
Has everybody used Miro before? If you haven't, just yell out for help.
Yes. Good. And hi, Kelly. Oh. Okay. I actually will share my. Right, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah, that's come up there.
Yeah, is that, what are you seeing though? Are you seeing my desktop?
Yeah, I am. And
okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, okay, that's not the right thing. I wonder why I did that. Okay. Yeah, so we find that Miro is quite useful in this virtual world when it's got lots of different coloured sticky notes. So it can be quite useful for doing workshopping. Right, so a bit of range. Looks like everybody's had some experience in using results chains and learning about, so people a bit new and haven't used Miro before. Good opportunity to have a play. And also, so everyone generally wants to just improve their knowledge around using them and looking at risks, and of course learning from others and the rest of the group. Okay, well, that's great. What I'll do now is hand over to Pip to kind of do a bit of a introduction to the exercise. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yep. And I'll see if I can share this. Okey-dokey. Can everybody see just that little PowerPoint slide?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Great. I'll just move my thing. So I know, Ashton, you said you were very new to results change, so we might talk a little bit more about them, but I thought we'd just start just thinking about risks, but also negative side effects. And one of the things is just thinking they're a little bit different, but both things that we want to think about, and both things that we can use our results chains or our sort of logic models to help us think about. So if we're thinking about risks, they sort of exist with or without the project. They're not really caused by the project, but they're sort of things that we may have identified some of them in our situation analysis. But if we haven't, I think results change is always a good time to sort of think about what could go wrong. What are other people thinking? Where does that happen? And they're really things where, whilst you don't have direct responsibility for them, actually thinking about them and thinking about whether you can prevent them or mitigate them is actually going to be really key to your project implementation. Just checking on the chat. Oh, that's just the Miro board. And that made me go forward. Don't do that. So negative side effects are a little bit different. They're things which are potentially actually caused by your project. So you actually do have a really specific responsibility to mitigate them. And again, one of the useful things you might do is again start thinking about, are there specific stakeholders who this might impact on disproportionately, and where it might really impact something they're doing now or something that they rely on. So you really need to be thinking about that, because again, you don't want to have your project be successful but to cause really negative effects for another group of people. Again, because you don't want to do that anyway, hopefully, but also it will sort of undermine kind of the success of your project long term if those are the sorts of things that are happening and people are looking at it saying, oh, hang on, when this type of a project's implemented, we really miss out, then that's going to be a big problem for you. So any questions about sort of risks and negative side effects? Are most people used to doing some level of risk assessment and thinking about some of the problems that might happen? Yeah. So you don't have to use the results chains to identify them, but it can be useful. I think it's a useful prompt point, but you can also then think about at which point in the results chain some of those risks might become more apparent as well. So you're sort of thinking about timing and where you need to go. So when we're thinking about this, we've got some new guidance in the PowerPoint pack. So people who've been used to the old standardized PowerPoint pack, it didn't include thinking about risks and negative side effects, but this new pack does. So these are just the slides from that. So we've got a little project example here, which is just about healthy natural grasslands, thinking about overgrazing as a threat and thinking about developing new sources of income. And in this case, thinking about tourism as the new source of income. So their original results came, if we develop a new source of income, there'll be increased international tourism. If there's increased international tourism, we'll have new job opportunities. If tourism increases, there'll be increased income in the communities. Increased income, communities would reduce their dependence on livestock. If they've reduced their dependence on livestock, then overgrazing is reduced. If overgrazing is reduced, we've got our healthy grasslands. So again, we use these sort of results chains to try and tell a story about how we think what we're doing will lead to the outcome we want. But in this case, has anybody got any ideas of the sorts of things that might be a risk or a negative side effect before I Show you. Oh, I can't hear you, Sarah. I can.
I was actually talking to myself saying, where are my reactions to put my hand up? But thank you anyway. I was just thinking with the first one, with increased international tourism, I guess a risk to that outcome would be such as the pandemic, where that just simply doesn't happen. So, and
Yep.
that's outside of the project, I guess. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep, that's a great one. Anyone else with any thoughts on the sorts of challenges that might?
A potential negative side effect might be that the tourism income is only going to certain elements of the community, not the entire community.
Yep. Yep.
Another risk, I don't know if it would be a risk or a negative side effect, but that tourism is seasonal. It's not consistent or reliable
Oh,
income.
that's a great one. And welcome, Andrew and Claire. So we're just having a look at an original results change and thinking about where some of the risks and negative side effects might come in. I'm not sure. Andrew, are you in? Yep. Oh, he's disappeared. So if we have a look at what they had on this one as some of the issues. So they didn't have the pandemic, but they did have, that was a good one. They had a negative side effect, which is the tourism might actually exceed the carrying capacity. So you might have too many tourists. I think we started to think about that issue of who benefits, you know, so job opportunities might be captured by just part of the community or by external people. Again, there might be some risks around political unrest, natural disasters, etc. And perhaps that's where something like the pandemic would come in. And on this one, no, they also don't have one, but one which I think is worth considering whenever you're thinking about new sources of income and that shifting people's behaviour is saying if people have more income, then they'll reduce their dependence on their existing income source. So that's something you might want to think about. Is that necessarily going to follow through? And we certainly know, I think it was a WWF project somewhere in Central America where they had a results chain like this, where they helped people increase the quality of some kind of nut. Anyway, a naturally growing nut in the forest, with the view that that would have them be less enthusiastic about grazing cattle. Actually, what people started doing once they got more income was buying more cattle. So it was a classic negative side effect that could have been anticipated as you go through. So again, as you start identifying some of these things and where they happen, what you can then do is think about how you might shift your results chain to actually cater and add some more results that help you deal with those things. So in terms of dealing with the carrying capacity, you might actually first set up some sort of participatory tourism plan that includes perhaps limits on how many tourists come. You're sort of thinking about how do we manage that. In terms of the job opportunity, something like training of local people, really explicitly making sure local people are ready for those jobs. That means you've got new job opportunities. So again, this one, they potentially still have a risk that they haven't picked up, but is that sort of reasonably clear to people, sort of how you might use the results chain to think about some of those things? Sarah?
Just wondering if yourself or anyone else has got any thoughts with regards to, in identifying risk, thinking about it from like a risk lens in the first instance, or first thinking about assumptions and then thinking about some of the risk of those. So I guess I'm interested in thoughts on the interactions between assumptions and risk. So I've sort of grappled a little bit with some of the assumptions, but in a way I'm thinking, oh, actually, if I thought about that from a risk lens, because I might be more used to that, it might have been more user-friendly for me and possibly others. And in hindsight, maybe that was would have been a better approach. But just wondering your experience in terms of the interactions between the two. It could all be, it depends, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing from others, because mine is kind of, I guess I've been very used to doing risk, so that I feel comfortable with that, but I quite like the structure of the assumptions as well. So, and I think looking at it from both directions can sometimes be really helpful, just remembering to kind of, if you've done your assumptions, then maybe turn back around and think about risks. But anybody else with any thoughts on doing that? Nope.
Yeah, I'd probably be more trained in looking at assumptions. And so then, you know, like the assumptions around, you know, that tourism, you know, if you give them an alternative livelihood, then they'll stop doing the thing that is having the impact. Yeah, and so, you know, kind of drill it, is that an accurate assumption? What else might they do? And yeah, so then that talks to the risks.
Yeah. But if people, I mean, when I started doing conservation, you sort of take off the hat and go, lots of white hair. The way that we thought about this sort of thing was using things like log frame analysis, which gets you to think about assumptions and risks sort of side by side. So for me, yeah, but I think that's one of the nice things, I think, with this, some of the new advice around results chains is to help people really think about incorporating risk a bit more explicitly. But I think, you know, again, part of the first place where you're starting to think about, in particular risks, probably less negative side effects, is in the situation analysis, where you're thinking about all the different stakeholders and what motivates them, and all of the different factors which might act to keep some of the things in place, which are meaning that you don't have, you know, the sort of health you want for the targets. So you'll be pleased to know this is it for slides. We're done on slides, because we thought what it might be nice to do is actually just have a look at a few different results chains, and a bit more of a look at it, and get people thinking about, can you see places where there might be risks or where there's a potential for a negative side effect? So just a little bit of practice, but also getting to see how other people approach that and the sorts of things that come up for them. So is everybody happy for us to sort of jump onto, we've just got the turtle example from the new set of slides set up as the first one to look at. Then we've got one that Natalie volunteered about the Murray-Darling Basin. And I think, Andrea, you're potentially happy to share one of your bird life ones as well. But it's always nice to look at, you know, we're looking at a couple of theoretical examples, but then it's nice to get into a real example when you're trying to think about these things. So I'll stop sharing, and we might just put the, are you happy to share the Miro board again, Saris?
Yeah.
And Ashton, please let us know if you're still going. That was all as clear as mud.
I was just trying to remember what the different shapes and colours meant, actually.
So let's, when we look at the turtle one, we'll just do a quick. Does anybody want to help Ashton out? Or we can. So typically our color coding, Ashton, is green is for targets or the things we care about. And they're sort of usually the end game, really, the ones we have a goal for. In this chain, purple, or in situation analysis, red or pink, is our threat reduction result. So threats are usually sort of somewhere in the red-pink color spectrum. The blue ones are results or outcomes we need to see along the way. And then anything in yellow is a strategy or an activity. So the strategies tend to be the little shape we've got there, and activities tend to come in little more square boxes or oval boxes. So yellow's doing, blue's what you get from doing, purple or red is kind of getting close to the ultimate result, so you sort of threat reduction, and green is kind of where, you know, that's That's your desired state where you really want to be. And our little test when you read through these things, just again, so you get that sense, we typically say if the effectiveness of circle hooks is demonstrated, then fishers will recognise the advantage of circle hooks. And in this chain, we've said fishers recognise the advantage. If fishers recognise the advantages and they can get circle hooks for free, then they'll accept and use. So there's kind of a, the effectiveness of circle hooks doesn't lead to fishers getting circle hooks for free, but it is actually a condition to actually move to that third result or fourth result. So we sort of have the if then, but you can add ands where as you're moving through, you might need more than one thing to get to the next result. And I think particularly as we're thinking about risks and negative side effects, it's probably where you're adding some ands. We need this and this and this. So if we have a look at this one, does anybody have any quick thoughts on any risks or negative side effects that might happen here? And you can call them out, or you could use a sticky note and pop them on.
I guess one would be that fishers don't recognize the advantages of circle hooks.
Yeah.
For whatever reasons. Maybe they're hard to come by. Maybe they're not very effective.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a big assumption in there that you can demonstrate the effectiveness. So the flip side of the assumption, I think this is where Sarah was going, is that risk as well. I think the original chain actually didn't have fishers can get circle hooks for free. So that was something the team circled back on and went, oh, hang on, just because they recognize that they have some advantages doesn't mean they're suddenly going to switch out their existing hooks for circle hooks. Anything else? We're going to play with this as a first one. Oh, there's one going up.
I don't know much about fisheries or circle hooks, but if you reduce bycatch mortality, is there a potential negative side effect of increased pressure on fishing stocks if it affects efficiency?
Yep. I'd say that would be definitely something worth thinking about. Yep.
Probably just expressing my confusion more than anything else, but the assumption that reducing this bycatch is going to improve turtle numbers. Is that something you'd consider a risk or not really?
It's a big assumption. Yeah. So there's not necessarily, going to be a direct risk, but you might be thinking about, where does this sit in terms of, say, some of the other threats? So is this the best threat to work on? And again, you might go back to your scoring of threats and be thinking. So I think, in a sense, you've hopefully addressed some of that risk in terms of actually ranking threats and thinking about the most serious ones. Because you don't want to have the risk of putting lots of effort into something and not having the desired benefit at the end.
I guess, and it may not be appropriate here, but it could be in other cases, that a risk may be that in like an inadequate evidence base or something like that, in which you're making those decisions of whether at what actions needed for the outcome that you want, something like that.
Yep. Yep. And how might you address some of these things? Any ideas on sort of new results or possibly just new actions as well, additional actions?
Yeah, it's a bit weird when you come in at the results chain level without all that background info.
All of the background.
But, you kind of assume that they're sort of focused in on this because there's already a pile of evidence about the impact of the hooks. So
yeah. And this is where, if we remember kind of the whole open standards process, you know, one of the things you're doing is really thinking, you know, if marine turtles are doing quite well and none of the threats rank highly, I'd be going, why are you making this chain? Because the risk there is you're spending lots of time and energy on something that doesn't need loads of help. So yes, there's sort of some embedded assumptions, which are, you know, marine turtles are in trouble. J hooks are one of the big problems. But we try and do that through the health assessment and the threat assessment. Because again, one of my favourite little groups recently came up with a bit of terminology. They said, oh, this is about getting rid of our pet threats, the ones we like to work on. So now that's one of my, I go, yep, pet threats, that's why we rank threats. But some of your pets just may not be as serious as some of the things that you're not as used to working on.
I think it's that thing too of, I mean, this is just dealing with one strategy and one threat, and it's an integrated approach. So sometimes I think it's good to on the diagram to refer to that there might be other results chains and other threats that are also applicable to marine turtles that could have a relationship. It's a bit like what you said before, Mel, around how do we know that there's something else that we're not factoring in that's impacting on the turtle populations and beyond just the hook lines.
But I think that's a great case for why we want people to be going back and doing a sort of reasonably regular review of their threats.
Yeah, I think another thing that helps too for me with this stuff too is with looking at the threat reduction in a results chain. And one of the things that I think sometimes is missing in the process is the rating, giving the numbers of the ratings of the threats, so we actually know what we've got, an objective and we've got an indicator, but what does the actual high threat, if it's a high threat, what does that actually equate to, whether it's in a number or words? Do you know what I mean? So, and if you're able to kind of work that out, so you know what high threat means, if the hook line is a high threat, what does that actually mean?
So here,
and same with low, but then you could also include that in the intermediate objective. So you've actually got something to measure that's going to stop you getting to the next point too far away. I don't think I'm explaining myself very well, but do you kind of get what I'm saying? Or?
I do. Well, and I think, Claire, what you're pointing towards here, and the thing I don't particularly like about this chain, is the use of percent instead of numbers. So if you were clear that to actually reduce that threat from, say, high to medium, you needed to be catching 2,500 less turtles, then that's really clear.
Yeah, that's right, and it helps be more integrated in. And
I guess that, I mean, that sort of just does bring us round that when you're setting those SMART goals and objectives, it can be really useful because it gives you that really tangible sense of For goals we usually have with the health, we try and get people to be pretty tangible and steer away from percents. But I think the same applies for threats, which is how do you know you've gone from very high to high, or how do you know you've gone from high to medium?
Yeah.
And so if you're working with teams, it's probably worth getting people to actually just consider some of that. So saying, oh, you know, if it's currently, and I use that kind of thing, if it's currently operating on the majority of a population, like how much reduction of that would you need to see? And then try and get people to be as specific as they can about it. So how do we go? I'm looking at it on my screen and I can't read the tiny writing. How do we go with thinking about any actions or any new results we might need?
I was just thinking the effectiveness of circle hooks as demonstrated before you've actually got to the threat reduction is a bit of that's like the first results box.
Yep, which basically means their first set of activities was all about engaging with people and demonstrating the effectiveness. So if you didn't meet that result, you weren't going to continue, basically. That's the end of that. So again, that might have informed why they said by 2008 they needed to demonstrate it, because it looks like they were operating from a 2005 benchmark. So it was kind of within 3 years. There's another assumption in there. We need to demonstrate this within 3 years. So do we want to have a look at a real example? So one from Murray-Darling Basin, and Nat, I might get you to walk us through the results chain, if you wouldn't mind.
I'll put a whole lot of qualifications on it. All good. So this is one I just put together myself, kind of for my own purposes. It was not done with a team. So TNC, and it was done partially after the fact. So it was me coming into a project and trying to lay out the logic of a project when the project was already up and going. So the project was, is about restoring flooding regimes to wetlands in the Murray-Darling Basin through the use of an impact investing fund as the mechanism. So that was the big sort of strategy that was predetermined. So up on the top line there, the first part was that the fund, which was set up and created, acquires and manages a permanent water entitlement portfolio. So that first step was we needed to complete the capital raises to secure the funding in the fund, and the aim was to get to 100 million. If we got to the fund to 100 million, that would enable the purchase of a permanent water entitlement portfolio of up to 40 gigalitres. If we did that, that water and cash, which is part of how the fund was set up, that it would be making donations of water and cash to the Environmental Water Trust, which is this next line down below. And if the Environmental Water Trust received those donations of water and cash, it would be able to deliver water to high priority wetlands, that more water would be available for environmental flows and watering, and that wetlands would receive regular watering and back to the regimes they needed to improve the health of those wetlands. There were some other little bits we had in there about future replication of that. So if we could show that this mechanism worked, that we would then look to potentially support others to replicate it and do similar things that would further increase the water available for environmental watering. And that could be both within the Murray-Darling Basin, but might be elsewhere. And that then the Environmental Water Trust, which is this second sort of main line, could be used for delivering other sources of like donated water or those types of things as well, which would further increase the water available. And I had a placeholder in there for stakeholder engagement and the role that it could play in supporting or not getting water delivered to wetlands on the ground. So this is a simplified version. There is a more detailed version of this with more steps in it, but this was a simplified version for me to talk others through how it's supposed to work. Is that enough detail, Pip?
Yep. So any thoughts from people on places where there might be potential risks or negative side effects in that one?
I can think of a few, but I'm too close, so I'm going to shut up and let others see.
Or even just questions for Nat?
I'll hop in, Nat. I'm not familiar at all with this area, but I'm just wondering if there's any government or regulation or funding sort of model changes that might have significant impacts on the sort of front end of that, or the left-hand side of
Yep.
the result chain, but it may not be applicable, just not aware enough of the system.
Yeah, look, and there is probably so, and it doesn't go into the level of detail here, but obviously the Murray-Darling Basin is a highly regulatory system, and over the time of operation of the fund, there has been changes in some of the regulations around how you can trade water, which has meant, like initially there was, you know, holding the water entitlements in one zone doesn't necessarily mean you can deliver it in another zone. And there has been changes in rules around trading of that. So the ability to be able to, where the water is owned versus where we want to deliver it for wetlands, yeah, there has been changes in that have affected how water can be delivered and where it can be delivered. So that is a good one.
Nat, how did you think about the kind of existential threats that might impact on this, like a climate change scenario?
So we didn't necessarily directly factor in climate change to it. Having said that, all of the modelling that was done in thinking about setting up the fund did factor in climate change scenarios into the modelling of the financial viability of the fund. So it was factored in sort of at that level. And part of it is obviously, you know, that we are able to deliver water to wetlands on the regimes they need pending climate. But yeah, it does impact how it works with the fund itself. The fund has rules around water availability in any given year, and depending on the water availability in any given year and the government's classifications of water availability is how much water is donated. So climate would potentially impact on those water availability. So if it's a very dry year, the fund donates 10% of its water. If it's a very wet year, it donates 40% of its water. So it kind of is built into the mechanism of the fund. But if we ended up having all dry years, then we're only getting on an average basis a small portion of the water being donated, which would affect some of the assumptions around how much we can deliver over time.
Okay, and would those trigger points be something you'd see in the monitoring plan, like in one of those indicators there, or are you saying it's kind of part of the development of the overarching strategy where you have that?
Yeah, so it probably was. So the assumptions and the indicators that and the objectives that I've got linked to that. So the average water here. So if the Environmental Water Trust was receiving on average 8 gigalitres of water per year, that was an averaged, if we owned 40 gigalitres and on average we're receiving 20% on a 10-year rolling average, that would equate to 8 gigalitres of water on average. So it's going to vary year to year, but on average. So it did sort of flow through in the assumptions. But when everyone's provided their comments, I'll give you the real life update on where this results chart has fallen down. So
Awesome.
I've just put some of the comments on pink notes, so they're there.
The prices of water more than anticipated played out.
That was mine.
Yeah, you know the system, Pip.
I was
So
thinking,
we didn't. Yes, that one happened. Any others or any other questions?
Is there I can't remember. Is there there's just a number of water allocations available? So it's not like there would be more people in the landscape that would suddenly appear because we want more farmers or whatever and be drawing out of the system that you.
I'm not quite following. Sorry, Claire.
so new entrants, Claire, to the
Yeah,
market.
basically. Yeah.
I'm still not quite sure exactly where you're going with that.
It's probably just I don't understand the full strategy. I'm just saying, out of scope of this, would there be other people that would suddenly be drawing from the system?
So, I mean, it's probably beyond the scope of what we were doing with this. There are other water investors out there that would be potentially trying to buy the same water we might be trying to buy. But that's the market-based system you're working with, and that also then drives the returns that the fund is trying to make. So it's all part of kind of how the system operates.
Fair enough, but I think the other one was water not secured early enough.
Yep. So do you want me to give you this my take on where it sits now? So my take on this results chain is it has played out exactly as is laid out. So we raised capital, we purchased water entitlements. The fund is making donations of cash and water that are being delivered to achieve outcomes for wetlands. So that it's working, as it was intended to. But this first thing here, we were aiming to get to a fund of 100 million in 3 years to get to the 40 gigalitres. We are nowhere near the 100 million. I think last time I saw, and I'm out of date with it now, it was around the 30 to 40 million. So we haven't acquired anywhere near as much water as was originally intended. In the meantime, water prices have gone up. So 100 million is not going to get us the same amount of water as when we originally started this project 7 years ago. And therefore the amount of water that's being donated and therefore the amount of outcome of the hectares of wetlands that are receiving the water hasn't reached the scale that we initially set out to reach. So the results chain is functioning, like it is flowing as it intended to, pardon the pun, and the various elements are leading to the outcomes, but they're not leading to the scale of outcome that we set out to achieve, because this very first box about getting to a scale of investment hasn't been achieved, or hasn't been achieved as quickly as was hoped to. So.
Yeah, so does that goes to some of the assumptions that you'd be able to raise that amount within 3 years? And yeah.
So, and it was, I mean, when we did the first capital raise, we were aiming to get to 20 million. We got to 25 million, kind of like that. So there was this, expectation that when we went on to the second capital raise, that it would also happen relatively quickly, but it didn't. So, and it's been a much more prolonged process of capital raising to try and get from the 25 million that was raised initially up to the 100 million.
That's
the
interesting.
assumption that the pilot would work or the first sort of tranche would work in the same way when you went to the second tranche was the challenge.
Yeah. And there's probably assumptions that we had in there around who would invest in the fund. So I think we were targeting kind of institutional investors like super companies or those types of things. And it's been a struggle to get the big institutional investors to invest. It's been a lot more. And certainly the first capital raise, I think, was a lot more smaller scale investors rather than a couple of really big, institutional type investors. So.
Now, if I can ask a question about the what the indicators that you used as part of this process, and
Yep.
any learnings that you may have in terms of, like, if you had particular targets, particularly I'm thinking of the complexities of, like, you earned a lot more maybe than expected initially, but then it petered off.
Yep.
So
Yep.
how would you perhaps modify sort of thresholds or things like that? I'm just trying to think how those complexities were managed in terms of modifying indicators and sort of doing it in a timely fashion. And my
Yeah.
brain's starting to go, oh, that sounds very hard.
Look, it was really interesting because one of the things that I kept pulling our director up on was he kept saying that there was a particular figure that he would throw out, which was fine when he was talking to investors. He would say, you know, the fund is worth 60 or 70 million dollars. I'm like, it might be worth 60 or 70 million dollars, but the equity invested in the fund is not at 60 or 70 million dollars because the fund's gone up in value over the time and the value of the assets it owns have gone up over time. That's irrelevant. That's a really good figure when you're talking to investors because they want to know that it's going to, you know, generate returns and, you know, their investment is going to be of value in the future. It's irrelevant when it comes to achieving the conservation outcome because the one figure that all of the conservation outcome depended on was new investment in the fund because it was the new investment in the fund that allowed the purchase of additional water entitlements, and it was the amount of water that was owned that then dictates how much is donated for environmental watering. So it helped me to really focus in on the one measure that was most important in all of this to getting the conservation outcome was that equity invested in the fund figure. So yeah, because everything else depends on it.
So one of the issues at the beginning was the assumption was larger investors would invest later, but you didn't. So as you weren't starting to see that happen in the first tranche, maybe there could have been maybe some more focus on uncovering what it was that meant larger investors weren't going there.
And I think part of that was, well, that'd be a really good, like it would be really good to even now do a review on, well, why didn't we get the scale of investors or the types of investors? And is it something fundamental about how the fund is set up that was restricting that? Because I know, for example, like some of the super funds, I think, have to invest for return above all else. And this is an impact investing fund. So they are not necessarily willing to concede returns for a feel-good outcome, for example. So is there something around that that is preventing some of those kinds of investors investing in the fund? I don't know. That's not my area of expertise, but it's something we should and probably need to learn from this to make these types of things more effective in the future.
Right. Thanks for that, Nat. Andrea, did you want to do a quick share of one of yours? We've probably got 5 minutes to do that. If you want to get people to take a quick look at it.
Hi, Pip. I reckon I've actually got a kind of a different question. I don't know if it's really related to risk so much, but it's more around tracking the progress on a results chain. So from kind of a visualization point of view, if you're trying to show partners and even a wider audience how you're tracking, how you're going, are there ways within Mirati to do that, like from a visual point of view, like an easy way to kind of show we're kind of halfway through this action, for example, or, you know, this percentage is complete. Yeah, if people have anything to share on that.
I'm just thinking, Sash, do you have any good examples of sort of visual ones where you've been tracking through them? Because the answer is yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
And the expert is Sasha.
Okay.
So in Mirati, well, there's that function where you put your reporting in against your factors and it will show up with different colored boxes.
Yeah.
So that's normally what we've used. But yeah, I mean, Pip, are you thinking like other kind of more diagrammatic?
Yep. So you can color code on the results change both your activities and your results. But yes, you can also, again, generate sort of little bar charts or pie charts saying how many, particular for actions, how far you've got. And then I think there's is there still a % complete function for results, Sasha? There used to be one, not.
There's one for indicators.
One for indicators. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can have in indicators, you can produce the bar graphs, or automatically produces your bar graphs for progress reporting against that. We've done kind of templates in Excel where we'll export the data from Marathi to generate pivot tables and make graphs and things like that. And then you can just duplicate that template or just input your data into that Excel template. And once you've got that set up, you just have to refresh the data and refresh your pivot tables to get your graphs and things regenerated. But I think unless you're going to go down the path of things like Power BI and kind of dashboarding, you're probably, Marathi's kind of limited in that sense. You could also, if you're wanting to keep it in Marathi, another thing you could do is use like group boxes and color code group boxes, and put text into your group boxes. But yeah, other than the little icons that come up with your progress reporting on your factors, I don't think there's another way in your diagram to make that look really good.
But you could color code your group boxes saying on this part of the chain, we've got to here and that's complete. These bits are in progress. So you could play with some of that visual work or else. And I think there's sort of an ongoing question in BirdLife as to how much you use Marathi as a program and have a look at it. I'm just thinking, Claire, has Bush Heritage been doing any sort of that sort of results-based reporting? We tend to use scorecards, or Bush Heritage, where I used to work, tend sort of have more scorecarded things than maybe use results chains.
You're on mute, Claire.
Yeah, we don't. Were you saying about the percentage?
And about the sort of how far you've got along the results chain?
With the showing the little completed or
or even any other way of showing how far you've got along, I guess.
Oh yeah, look, we use that, but also just we do quarterly progress reporting against each of the activities, so you'd see that little colour. But yeah, we take a lot of that stuff out and use the visualization in a dashboard more than in Marathi.
Andrea, there are also coded Word templates that will pull out progress reporting that you can input into Marathi Share, and it will pull out. It's mostly for that kind of high level strategy activity reporting, though. There's not great templates for results level reporting or target level reporting yet, but there is for strategy and activity level progress. I'm happy to send you through some examples. Otherwise, you can contact, is it Foz or Christina?
Probably Foundations of Success more than Christina. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sasha. Yeah, that'd be great to have a look.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I've got your email, so I'll shoot you.
Now we're kind of getting, Sarah's heading off. We're kind of getting to the end, and Saras and I had set up just a little plus delta to get some feedback on how this sort of looking at examples type process has gone, and any thoughts on how we could improve it if we do this style of webinar in the future. So please feel welcome to sort of just give us some feedback, anything that you think worked well that you could keep in future webinars, anything that didn't work so well that you'd sort of say, let's change that, or ideas to change.
Or you can pop straight into the Miro board and add a sticky note. Thanks, Matt.
Sorry, I missed the first 10 minutes. I was on a call. But did you introduce the kind of concept and assuming of results chains and what they are and how they're used and all that kind of?
We didn't do lots on results chains. We did a quick sort of very, very swift refresher for Ashton. But we just had a quick look at where results and negative side effects fitted into them.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So we tried to limit the number of slides. So we just had the 3.
Yeah, I agree. It's good to look at real examples as well as kind of standard ones that you might see in supporting tools and information. So you can go back and revisit some of those things in the CCNet slides. So that's good.
I have to say, I was glad we just had you as a nice small group to play with this idea first, because if we'd had a big group and had to split into lots of different rooms to have chats, then that would have been a bit hard. But I want to say thanks, Nat, for volunteering your results chain. If we're going to run these, we need people to sort of be brave enough to give us things to play with.
Yeah, it was great to have a real example.
Tough love feedback. I could have used it when I was putting it together, to be honest. So
yeah, well, that's the idea, is that people can bring things to sessions and get input from the Brains Trust. And yeah, it was a great opportunity to learn from what others experience. Right. Well,
yeah, it was really good to have that live example. Thanks, Nat. And I think if you can get through a few different ones in the session, that's really valuable to kind of, it's easy to get used to your own way of thinking, and seeing other people's helps you readjust.
yeah. And I think just on reflection, like for me, looking back at this now, I can see where all the risks are now. I don't know that I could see them when I was putting it together, but there's a few more that didn't make it that probably should be in there as potential risks as well. So yeah, hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, exactly. Even if other people had looked at them, they may not have come up with them, but this is the opportunity to learn and share that, so if someone else tries to replicate something similar, that they can learn. So thanks very much for sharing this one. It's helping me to understand those kind of when you do funds and things, develop what you need to think about.
Yep, and log frames, that's good. So partly I have to say that also Cyrus and I were going, what will we run our session on? So one of the reasons, and this is a bit of advertorial, that Sasha has sent out the survey asking people what they'd like to learn more about, is just to help give us some sense of the sorts of help people are looking for, and then we'll try and design some sessions specifically for that. So
so if you've got ideas,
please share with us the kind of questions you've got. And I mean, if we're happy to do sort of just go back to, like, we can do some introductory stuff for people, especially for people like Ashton who've come into an organization and just want a bit of starting stuff. Happy to do that, or really specific technical queries like how to get stuff out of Marathi. So either of those things or anywhere in between, I think is absolutely fine to sort of flag that it would be good to do.
Yeah, actually, and on that, I'll just do another plug. There is a Healthy Country Planning / Conservation Standards short course going to be held in Tasmania from the 23rd to the 27th of January. So if you know of anyone who would benefit from that, please get in touch with myself or Sasha. We'll be Conservation Management's running that with the University of, under the kind of the University of Tasmania and the Protected Areas collaboration.
Thanks, Andrea, for putting that specific request. That's great. Alrighty, we might finish up because I think it's about
Yeah.
2.
Yeah.
And I'm getting persistent notices saying, do I want to disconnect from my iPhone, which basically means my iPhone has no more battery. Because I'm sitting in a garden at ANU. But thank you everybody for coming.
So
Thanks very much.
Good to see
Thank
everybody.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone. Have a good end
Bye.
of year and yes,
Yes.
greetings break. Okay,
Okie dokie.
see you.
See you.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Ashton, for coming. Thanks, Andrea. Good to see you.